Hey, everybody, on this week's episode of the podcast, episode 7, season 2, Now That's a Great Story, The Process, we talk about the moments of inspiration that you find when you're doing your research. There's one moment, actually one very recent moment from a book that I read from Ralph Abernathy, who was huge in the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King's number 2 guy, that I just found deep inspiration in. And then Sonya kind of, comes clean with the ways in which, maybe I'm not as optimistic as I think I am when I read great inspiring quotes like that. It's a good back and forth. If you want to stay in touch with me, best way to do it is through the newsletter, paulkicksnewsletter.com. This week's episode has there's some truth telling. I mean, I'll go ahead and say it. I think that I've got some work to do, right? So go ahead, give it a listen. Season 2, Now That's a Great Story, The Process. So I want to talk for a second about what it actually means to be inspired by the research you're doing, because it happens so often in your research. You kind of almost feel like you should be paying to get these sort of insights. Do you remember recently, a few weeks ago, I was having a really hard time, and I wasn't so sure that I was going to be able to make it on my own. And I'd come to you and I'd said, Sonya, I just don't know that this is working out. And I had a lot of sort of self-doubt about what the future might hold. This was about a month and a half after I got laid off from ESPN. Do you remember that? Do you remember some of those conversations we were having?
Yes.
Okay, so at the same time as that was happening, I was researching the book on Birmingham, and I was researching at that moment, I was researching Ralph Abernathy's memoir. So for anybody who doesn't know, Ralph Abernathy was Martin Luther King's number 2. He was his best friend, and sort of to some extent, he was the counter to who Martin was. He was far more Martin was very intellectual, not to say that Ralph wasn't, but he carried himself in a far more everyday manner than Martin did. And in Ralph's memoir, The Walls Come Tumbling Down, there is this passage that was about the Birmingham campaign. And of course, my book is about that Birmingham campaign. And he talks about all of the problems that they were facing at that moment in time. They thought they were going to have so many different people who wanted to sign up and go to jail and all of that. And they get down to Birmingham and nobody wanted to help them. Nobody really from Birmingham was wanting to help them. In addition to that, at least initially, they thought that Bull Connor, the racist police commissioner in Birmingham, was going to do everything possible to try to shut them down. But Bull Connor had actually been advised by other police chiefs to sort of lay off the movement leaders and to not make a big show of being, violent with the people that they were arresting. And why was that? Because as soon as they showed that sort of violence, this would be picked up by the media. All right? So Ralph and Martin and all of these people were having so much difficulty gaining any sort of traction in Birmingham. And he said, we saw complications everywhere around us and as the work of the devil. Now, I don't see the complications around me as the work of the devil, but here is what Ralph said next. He said, the times where we saw those complications as the work of the devil, what we came to realize instead was that it was actually God guiding us to the solution that we needed. And if we just worked through that solution, worked toward that solution, we would find it on our own. This, when I read it, this idea that sort of your worst impulse, your worst fears, the worst possible reaction to your work can actually also be the way to reach the thing that you want to do. It was just I just got chills as I read that passage of Abernathy's memoir. It was one of the best things I've ever read. And I feel like, Sonya, there are so many opportunities in the course of research to find these moments and to see how they inspire you. And like, this is one of the reasons why I am such a big champion of like doing books, is because I end up learning so much about them in ways that like don't even have anything to do with the book.
Yes, but I want to point out one thing. I love that quote. I love how inspired you were by it. But as an outsider, I can tell you, you are not an optimistic reporter. You do not go into a story going, this is going to be great. I'm going to find everything. And this person is going to be wonderful. Like, you have a lot of pessimism when you go in, and you spend a lot of time trying to find material that erases that doubt. Like, that's just how you operate. And so when you hit a wall, when you hit something that is frustrating, it is very difficult for you to, I think, process it as something that might propel you forward.
Yeah, I think it's probably fair to say that I operate from a perspective of what can go wrong as the means to try to prove how it could possibly go right. Like, I think about all the things that could happen that are bad. And in some ways that almost inspires me, or at least invigorates me to start.
Yes, and I want to say something in Robert's case with the first book, trying to prove, that he wasn't a fraud, that he actually did what he said he did. That,
we talked about that a couple of episodes ago. But yeah, go ahead, keep going.
You were not optimistic about that research. You were not thinking that this is going to, these obstacles are going to be great and I'm going to get through it. You were extremely upset. It was very hard to hit these obstacles and try and figure out ways around them. Like, it's hard. It's not easy when you are in it. And, I don't know. I mean, I want to think optimistically, but I know how you report, and I know how, I know this book is different because we're not dealing with an imposter. Like, what happened.
Yeah, but I mean, like, Robert wasn't an imposter. It was
not
just
an imposter,
that
but there were lots of people who were saying
there were lots of very knowledgeable scholars who were telling me that I had found something. This is actually something I talk about in depth in season 1 of the podcast too, in one of the after shows. So you can go there and find it if you want. But I'll just say here that, yeah, I freely admit that for like a year, I was thinking, why is it that the biggest sabotage he carries out, there is no independent verification of it?
But how did that make you feel?
Effing terrible.
Yeah.
Like,
I was like,
really hard. It wasn't like it was the linchpin of the entire book because I had a ton of military records and all the rest, but it was just so weird. Because I'm like, how come I can't find this thing? And it drove me batshit crazy.
Yeah, and that batshitness is what makes you such a great reporter. Like, you have that doggedness. I wouldn't say great, but dogged. Okay, well, so if you want, but
so quick to back off.
I want to be here for you. But it's that level of doggedness that keeps you going, right? So, I love that quote, and I certainly eventually you got to the point where you found what you needed. But it was through that doubt that propelled you forward. And I think that's what always propels you forward. So not that I don't think that quote is wonderful, but I don't necessarily think in your case.
Well, like, I think that, like, that's actually something that I want to play with in the Birmingham book, though, is this idea of how much those guys went in with high expectations, and those expectations were immediately dashed, and they were ruined. Like, they were like, you have to sort of understand, in 1963, if these guys failed, they had just failed in Albany, Georgia. For all of King's celebrity, he hadn't had nothing. He had no significant civil rights victory whatsoever. They put all of their financial resources, all of their human resources in Birmingham. This is a big part of the reason why we find this book so appealing. And they were failing flat out. Like, it was looking like they are not going to be able to win in Birmingham, and if they don't win in Birmingham, the whole of the civil rights movement might lose. And if it loses, by the way, like, it isn't like the South is just going to reform itself on its own. I mean, you have people like Bull Connor using the N-word all the time and denying people their basic rights. This is an idea, an ideology that's spreading throughout the South in the 1960s. It looked like the South was moving backwards in very significant ways. So there were huge stakes in Birmingham, and that's why Abernathy's quote about, we realized in time that it was God who was actually directing us to the solution through the very problem that we were facing. I find that to be remarkable. It's something that Marcus Aurelius talks about in his book Meditations. It's a big concept of Stoicism, and I had on Ryan Holiday in season 1 of the podcast, and we talked about a lot about Stoicism there. I also went on Ryan's podcast. We talked about it even more. I read it, sometimes I consult it with you. So like that sort of Stoic thinking of like how the obstacle can itself become the way is appealing to me. And Abernathy's quote I just found at that time in, just before the holidays of 2020 to be like so deeply affirming in its own way. And I wish that I could be more optimistic than I am. I'm trying. I actually see a therapist for this, and we're trying to get to that point. Do you think that I'm more optimistic now than I was 5 years ago when we were doing...
A little bit. You're working on it. I mean, it's one thing, optimism as a reporter and optimism in your day-to-day life. Like, I think in your day-to-day life, you're much more optimistic than you were 5 years ago. But I think as a reporter, if you're doing a story on someone, you go in and you try and find as much information as possible. And you're looking at the civil rights canon, which has been reported on ad nauseum. And so you have the luxury of having information about people in great deal, in minutia that maybe you wouldn't have.
Yeah, but so
much.
There's so fair. There's more there, but so much of what I'm finding that is worthwhile ends up being stuff. The Abernathy memoir aside, ends up being stuff that I'm just finding in archives. Like that's a good chunk of anyway. But anyway, go ahead. What else were you going to say?
I was just going to say that when you are doing this is a different kind of set of reporting than what you did. When you are faced with the kind of reporting where you are trying to uncover facts, you're trying to match facts with actual events that happen that haven't maybe been well documented, and you can hit those huge milestones to the narrative, and you can't go forward, and maybe it's a court case and something didn't happen in the court case the way that it was reported. I mean, there are so many things that happen. That kind of stuff, when you hit those kind of roadblocks, those are the ones that you lose. You don't have optimism. You're like, this is not working. Like, I've got to find a workaround. Like, I've got to figure it out. And that's when you dig your heels in, and that's when you go crazy trying to report the hell out of the story and find the information that you want. It drives you. That's why you're a good reporter. I mean, you're so reporter. I don't want to, but that's what drives you. That is the drive.
It's the yin and yang of life, right?
Yes.
Like the very thing that will propel you ahead is also the thing that will drive you crazy.
Yes, and I think with the Abernathy, that's more analogous to what you're going through. I say at this time in your life, you just turned 40.
I did.
And so, there's lots of changes in your life. I think, though, as much as I would like to say that you are incredibly optimistic and this is going to make a huge difference in your reporting, I think it would probably make a bigger difference in your life. And the next time you do a story about maybe, someone who's head of a crime family and you're trying to dig up information and you can't find it, are you going to be like, oh, well, this is an obstacle and this is awesome, and I welcome this obstacle as a way for me finding greater truth, and this is wonderful? Or are you going to be pissed and on the phone trying to get the information?
But isn't the end result the same anyway?
Maybe, but for you, I don't know. I don't think so.
Well, if you end up getting the stuff that you need, then it works out. The obstacle does become the way. Like the very problem you're facing, and Abernathy would say, it's God himself that's guiding you to the solution. So
I think your inspiration as a reporter comes from problems that you can overcome. When you see problems in a narrative, you see problems in a character, you see problems, and then you you try very hard to kind of understand that character more. You do a more of a deep dive, and you go, further and further into that character until you get what you want, and that's what drives you. It's you're the only writer that I see on a daily basis.
I'm the only writer you sleep with.
Yeah. I'm a lady. I don't talk about those things. But I think it's different. I mean,
What would you say is for anybody that's looking to start their first book, and what would you tell them about like how to work their way through these obstacles? Because there will be these obstacles. Is it just tenacity? Like, what specifically would you say to somebody? Sonya's very good at opetizing. So
I'm so good at that. I would say you have to. I know we've talked about this. You have to really love what you're researching. That's very important.
Yeah, I think that's important.
But you also have to. You have to be able to you have to be able to recognize those obstacles as the things that are going to propel you forward. And I don't necessarily know. I mean, if you're not religious, if you don't believe in a higher power, those obstacles are there to help you. In your case, it's, I am going to get over that wall, come hell or high water. I'm going to figure this out. And that's what drives you. You want to win. You're competitive. You want to win. You are not going to give up. And so I think you have to figure out your drive, how you're going to report, your inspiration based on, I'm not that kind of reporter. I don't have those kind of, I don't hit a wall.
But like the thing that I have loved about being with you now across all of these years is you have this amazing ability to contextualize the problem for what it is. In the moment when I am like, this is insurmountable, I don't know how I'm going to do this, you have the ability to step back and say, is it really that bad? Isn't there another way around? Like, let's think of a possible solution. So when I'm at my most cynical and pessimistic, you're there to help. It comes back. I feel like this is going to be a theme of the entire season. It comes back to teamwork in some sense.
And my awesomeness.
And Sonya's awesomeness. And you have to have some sort of good support around you, whether it's, again, a partner or a sibling or a friend or a parent or somebody.
Well, you also have to be able to ask for feedback. I think when you report, you can live in a bubble. Certainly before you met me and when I was reporting my own stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
You work in a bubble.
You do work in a bubble.
You don't have that kind of feedback from someone. So, when you come to me and you say, here is the wall I can't get over, I can say, well, why don't we just go this way? Why don't we go around? Or why do you have to take the wall? Like, why can't you do this way? And that's very much how I reported, and I feel
like one of the walls we're facing right now is just like the pandemic.
Pandemic
right?
is a huge wall.
How do we really are at the point where we have got to get down to Birmingham. But we can't
yet.
Things
are closed.
Everything is closed. And so one of the things you told me was, all right, well, let's just continue. I was like, I've exhausted everything that there is to read, that I can read remotely. I need to go to the archives. And the truth is there isn't. And so what you were able to guide me to do in the past probably 3 weeks or so is to say, well, actually, can you just call the archives themselves and see if they can just send you some stuff? And that's what I've been doing right now. I'm actually like working through this fantastic senior thesis of all things that was published in the 1970s by some undergrad at Brown, which he's talked with all of these primary players like a decade after the Birmingham campaign. And some of this stuff is stuff I have not read anywhere else. Now, the beauty of this is obstacle is the way, right? Now, because they were kind enough to give it to me, now I don't have to make that trip down to Providence to go get that. It's with me right now, right? When I finish with the reading over that and sort of writing the proper notes on it, then like we're done with that, right? Like there's always something that you can do, and it's that conversation that the two of us have had that's helped push that forward.
And I think the pandemic has also made us much more resourceful than we were with the first book, because the idea was, well, let's get on the plane and go. Go see it. Go do it. Go physically look at it. Go touch it. And now it's a much more thoughtful process because we have to be. But, you know, that idea of let's see what we can get here in our, like, what can we get right now to work on, even though we can't get other things. I think that certainly helped you a great deal to kind of contextualize, you know, where you are in your reporting, where you need to be, and give you, I think, maybe a little bit more peace with how this is going right now.
I'm going to go ahead and say that you not only complete me, you contextualize me.
I feel like that's a card.
Yes.
That you should
We
write.
should probably
That's just for
trademark. Hallmark can't take it. This is ours.
It's pretty good.
Now That's a Great Story is produced by one
Jeffrey Willett.
The music
Also by Jeffrey Willett.
comes from Mr. Jeffrey Willett. Sonya and I will see you next week. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you like this season of Now That's a Great Story, or just getting caught up on the first, the best way to keep in touch is through the newsletter, paulkicksnewsletter.com. There, you'll get even more advice on how to be the best writer and storyteller you can be. In fact, right now, I've got a free PDF for you. The 7 rules top long-form writers follow to make more money from their stories. Sign up for the newsletter and you'll get the free PDF. Head there now, paulkicksnewsletter.com.